there's no secret about the fact that in North America, hatchbacks and sedans, they're not really very popular. Instead, American buyers and Canadian buyers want one thing: crossovers. And I say that even though I know that many of you watching prefer hatchbacks and convertibles and sedans. But automakers have decided that crossovers are the thing. And so in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen plenty of cars that we would have once called a hatchback called a crossover instead. Like the original Chevrolet Bolt EUV, Kate.
Yes, that was a hatchback to my mind. In fact, it was a little bit of a hot hatch.
It in fact reminded me very much of the hot hatches that we found in the UK when we were growing up in the some time ago.
Let's say Fiesta XR2 and then leave it there.
Yes, yeah. I was going to add the Golf, but Fiesta XR2 will do just nicely. And the original Bolt combined that hot hatch feel with moderate hot hatch handling. Although Chevrolet, even though the car was designed by a Brit, liked to market it as a CUV, a compact utility vehicle.
Yeah, which is a generous term for a car with that kind of ground clearance, that kind of body shell.
But it's really a hatchback.
Yes, it's a hatchback with a sticker on it.
Yet the market is adamant. It wants a crossover. Automakers are adamant. We want crossovers. And so Chevrolet has done what several other automakers have done in recent years. Taken a car that was once more hatchback than crossover, made it slightly longer, and then called it a crossover. Except in this case it's not. It's the Bolt EUV. E stands for electric, UV stands for
utility vehicle.
So today we're going to give you a brief look around of this car that's not quite a Chevrolet Bolt EV, give you a look at some of its external features, take a look at some of the interior design elements, and then in a couple of days' time we'll share with you our on-the-road thoughts. Let's take it away. At the side, the silhouette of the Bolt EUV is familiar enough when you compare it to its parent, the Bolt EV. I'm talking the original one here. In terms of overall dimensions, there's not a lot of difference between this and the Bolt EV, and frankly, it's all about styling. The only thing that really shows off this car's rugged exterior is this plastic trim, which has become de rigueur for anybody wanting to make a city car feel more like it's going to go on an off-road trail. But let's be honest, this doesn't have the ground clearance for off-roading, and it's only two-wheel drive, not four-wheel drive. This variant comes with this rather fetching roof rail that allows you to affix any number of roof-mounted peripherals onto your vehicle, although I feel like I shouldn't have to say it, but I'm going to, based on what some other YouTubers have been posting lately. You put something on the roof, your range is going to go down. And that brings me to the actual range of this car. While the Bolt EV has a slightly longer range, this one sits at about 250 miles of real-world driving, which is what the original Bolt was capable of on a good day, and any Bolt that's had the battery replacement and given themselves some extra battery capacity will also be able to do that without nary a problem. Moving to the front of the car, you have the same indicators in the mirrors that you'll find on all Bolts now, and you have your charge port up front. This is the same inlet that's been on all Bolts with DC quick charging since the beginning of time, and mercifully DC quick charging is now standard. However, it's still only a maximum of 55 kilowatts, which is pretty pants. It's okay if you want a quick top up, but earlier on today we tried charging this up and it was charging at a maximum of 43 kilowatts. It is not a hot day, it's a moderate autumn day, and that sucks. Moving on for the styling, you've got this lovely Bolt EUV emblazoned on the front here of the hood line, and then we come down to these sweeping front lights. In terms of wheels, there is a slight difference in the wheel design compared to the original Bolt EV, but again, you have fairly standard, non-offensive alloy wheels throughout. Under the floor, you've got a 66 kilowatt hour lithium ion battery pack, 65 kilowatt hour usable. It is liquid cooled, and it's the same battery that Chevrolet was putting in Bolt EVs as part of the battery replacement program. This particular variant of the Bolt EUV comes with a sunroof, which was something that was actually fairly rare if you wanted to have the top line Bolt EUV with a tilt and slide sunroof, and you wanted the Super Cruise. This car is configured with both because press departments like to give journalists fully laden cars so that they can get all the praise in the reviews.
Up at the front here, there is a lot going on. Well, not always in a good way, but there is a lot going on. So we have these active swoosh markers on the corners. These do the turn signal with a little swipe up, which looks really cool. And then down below that are the headlamps. These on this particular trim are auto dimming, really adequate headlamps. They do their job with, shall we say, not a lot of aplomb, but they do function. They dim when someone approaches. You also have this nice crease up here, which would be really nice if the crease on the hood aligned with the crease on this front trim. The front trim also has kind of a sharp edge on the back of it where you put your hand when you open the hood, because the moulding just isn't that great. It's really a little bit frustrating because actually I really like the way the car looks. I think the front end looks really dynamic, and had they put a little more care in, it could have been really great. Other things of note at the front, we do have a camera here. This is the one for the 360-degree view. You also have cameras on each mirror and another little camera up at the top. Down even lower, this actual grille, which leads to a radiator down here, also has the radar for the adaptive cruise control. At last. The original Bolt did not have radar-assisted active cruise control, which was always one of our frustrations. And finally, they have added it. Maybe that explains where some of the money went. Underneath the hood, you might hope that the redesigned Bolt and Bolt EUV would have exciting new hardware. Something smaller, something better packaged, maybe more powerful charging. No, it's all really very much the same. In fact, it's almost indistinguishable from the Bolt itself. There is nowhere to put anything under here. There's no front trunk. And the other thing that's really weird is that the packaging of it seems less space conscious. There's a lot more wasted space underneath this front hood.
Inside, there's a very familiar feel if you've ever driven the Bolt EV. However, the similarities are only because of design language that passes over and the decision to keep certain infotainment and dashboard icons the same. The dashboard behind the driver is the same in terms of the information it displays, but it's a smaller unit. The center touchscreen is very familiar to anybody who's owned a Bolt, yet it is also different. It's been revamped. We'll come to this in the drive because I think this is probably one of the best bits of the Bolt EV interior. But the rest, well, let me remind you that Chevrolet dropped the price of the original Bolt. It then dropped the price of the Bolt when the Bolt EUV and Bolt EV second generation came out. And when you drop the price of something, you change the materials that you're using. The interior in this car feels much more like a $27,000 car, which is the starting price of the base model EUV. but also the care and the consideration that has gone into this cabin feels less. There's a nasty gap here between this trim piece and this trim piece. Some of the material choices are cheaper and more plasticky than they are in the original Bolt. And when it comes to driving position, while this car does have an electronically adjustable driver's seat, the seat doesn't even feel as comfortable as the original Bolt, at least to my mind. There's a horrible little crossbar just by my shoulder blades. The lumbar support is okay, but not particularly configurable. And when you're sitting behind the wheel, while the wheel does feel okay, they've moved buttons around. The original Bolt EV had its forward and back seat buttons placed just about here, and then the button that was here behind the center cross brace of the steering wheel was the Regen On Demand button. And if you hold the steering wheel like I do, with your hands at about 9 and 3, it was perfectly suited to give you easy access to Regen On Demand. Chevrolet has moved it up for the Bolt EV and Bolt EUV after the refresh. That means it's up here, which is more easily reachable if you like your hands at 10 and 2, but it's a long way away if you now follow the recommended hand positions being pushed by most driving schools in North America. That's having your hands down here somewhere. The steering wheel has now been flattened off for this year, but again, there are some issues here. If you put your finger on the back of the steering wheel on this vehicle, you feel the little nodule, the little nipple, where the injection molding did its thing for creating the plastic parts. And you can feel it also on the back of the indicator stalk, which again, feels a little more plasticky and less robust than the original Bolt EV control mechanism. That said, the steering wheel is a good size and fits nicely under the hand. And because this car has Super Cruise, you have this little nodule on top of the steering column that is your infrared transmitter. This is how the car makes sure that you are actually watching the road ahead and not playing a game on your phone. You also have this indicator here on the steering wheel, which glows a solid green when Super Cruise is active. In terms of the switchgear and the buttons on the steering wheel itself, again, there's been some changes, and I'm not sure I like this as much as the original switchgear on the original Bolts. Now, I'm going to say this, it might be because I've owned not one but 2 original Bolts, and I like that car. But in this case, you've now got scroll wheels, and you've actually got indications written above and below for different things, and you can't press them, you have to actually press the scroll wheel instead. That said, everything is fairly easy to see, and it follows some logical patterns here. What doesn't follow much logic, though, is the fact that the Sport mode, the traction control button, and the lane keep assist have now been moved in front of the place where you can put your phone to inductively charge it. And I would rather see those on the steering wheel, especially the LKA button. Also, for some reason, the traction control button is larger than the other 2, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, and gone is the gear shifter of the original Bolt. Instead, you have these touch buttons. What that's done is it's moved the cup holders much further back, which makes it harder to reach the cup for the driver. Previously, the cup holder was just about where my hand is now, so about here. Now it's moved back, and instead you have these touch buttons instead of the original gear selector. The other thing that I will note is the center console now feels smaller than the center console in the original Bolt, and there's no way of moving the armrest backwards and forwards, which means if you sit like I do, you don't actually have anything to rest your elbow on, except maybe your cup, which again gets in the way of your arm because it's been pushed back. Some places I would like to compliment Chevrolet though are things like the climate control buttons, which are now discrete, hard, real-world toggle switches as opposed to the digital switches of the original Bolt. I think that's a major improvement, and you've also got some indicators just above those switches that allow you to interact with them with a nice tactile feel. It's much more comforting than trying to faff around on a touchscreen. One thing I don't like though is that the hazard indicators have moved all the way over to the right side of the touchscreen, which means it's easier for your front seat passenger to operate than it is for you to operate. I am just at the maximum of how far I can reach, and I'm right on that button now. This car has OnStar, of course, and all of the features that come with OnStar. It also has a rear view camera that allows you to see the world behind you through a camera rather than through the optical way that you normally would with a mirror. And that is actually beneficial if you have a very full car, because it means you can still safely see the world behind you even if you are full to the roof, although there's some question as to whether filling all the way to the roof is safe. It's also important to note you've got the sunroof controls here and the shade if you have in fact got a sunroof, but as I said earlier, that's not actually a given on this model due to parts shortage. I'm not a fan of this plasticky leather fake feel here, but everything else is reasonably okay. The only other criticism I would give is that there's not a lot of sound dampening in this car, something that you will feel on the motorway.
When they redesigned the Bolt and they launched the Bolt EUV, the back of the vehicle was extensively redesigned. You get this big black stripe across the back, you have the camera up high with a little spray nozzle, which is very nice, and one of our favourite things, it does have a rear wiper, always handy if you like seeing out of the back of your car. Across on the side here you have these dynamic looking, really sharp, beautiful lights, which I actually really like, except for one really important thing. When the original Bolt came out, these lights would serve as brake, turn and your rear running lights. And then if you opened the trunk while you were driving, you had a large load in, it would switch between these and these lower lights. But in the Bolt EUV and the Bolt, they have cut that out. It no longer switches between these two and just uses this as a rear red marker. The brake lights and the turn signal are down low, completely separate and not where anyone not familiar with the car would expect them to be. I really think that's a very retrograde step, and it really impacts the safety of the back of this vehicle. Stylistically though, they do look nice, this flash. It would be nicer if everything aligned back here, but like the rest of the car, there seems to have been a bit of a lack of care in assembly. A lot of the trim, a lot of the swage lines, things just don't quite line up. You see it at the front and you see it here at the rear and at the side. While on the original Bolt both cameras were low down, here the rear view camera has been moved up to the top and has a nice little spray nozzle that allows it to keep it clean. The one down here for the reversing camera does not get a spray nozzle or any means of keeping it clean, so as is often the case with these kinds of vehicles, when dirt and muck gets thrown up onto the back, the rear view camera for parking becomes obstructed. Down low on this big, black, rugged looking panel that makes the car maybe feel more off-roady, at least in someone's eyes, are the 4 ultrasonic parking sensors. They are really useful when you're backing into a, say, parking space in a supermarket, the kind of place this car is really more likely to be. And then right down here is the reversing light, where again, like the brake and turn signals, no one would be expecting to look. As with many cars in this price bracket, you don't get to dance to open the back, you just press a button. And because I've driven the Bolt quite a lot, my hand instantly goes here. No, they redesigned it, it's now even lower, where it can fill with more mud. In the back here, you do get slightly less space than the Bolt. It's pretty marginal. With the seats up or the seats down, it's pretty comparable. Like the original Bolt, you get a little shelf here that makes it a flat load entrance. That is nice, although unlike the original Bolt, it is incredibly flimsy. And again, unlike the original Bolt, there's no means to hold it up. You just kind of have to prop it somewhere. No slot to drop it into. Below that, you do have another really useful, usable cargo area. And then below that is stored the charge cable that comes with the car. That is a 110 or 220 volt cable, which has interchangeable plugs that you can switch on the end of it. It's a really nice thing that we've started seeing included by a lot of manufacturers when they choose to include a charge cable. A nice touch for something where they could have made it cheaper and they actually did not. Also on the back of the seat you do have the child seat anchors, which you should be using if you're using child seats in the back of your vehicle, and you do have some little loops here that can be used with an optional cargo net.
You'd think, with a car like the Bolt EUV, which is just a tiny bit supposedly bigger than the regular Bolt, that you would have a whole lot more space for rear seat passengers, but you don't. You actually have less hip room, slightly less headroom, but you do get a little bit more leg room. It's so tiny though that you really don't notice it when you're sat in the back of the Bolt EUV. If I put my shoulders back and I sit upright, I'm 5'9" and a bit, and I've probably got maybe that much space, what's that, an inch or two between me and the roof. And while the armrest is at just the right height, it's got this awkward little bit here that comes out for the door pocket, and it doesn't feel particularly comfortable. Again, I don't feel like my back is well supported. If I sit back, it leaves an arch in my back. If I try and sit forward slightly, that's going to be painful on a long distance trip. And so the rear of this vehicle is probably going to be better suited to children, or at least people who are younger and may not have quite as many aches and pains after a long road trip. And that's a real disappointment. It doesn't make sense that Chevrolet went through this massive change to design this vehicle when there's so little difference between it and the regular Bolt. It's really all about styling and the fact that you can turn around and say, yeah, but I have a sunroof, or I have Super Cruise, both of which aren't available at all in the regular Bolt because they got rid of the high-end Bolt trim and instead replaced it with this. The other thing I should point out is that while there is a place for you to put cups, there's no actual way to grab a pull and pull it down. You just kind of have to get your hands in there and do that. And then if you turn this into a four-seater, again, yes, there's space for a cup, but not really for your arms. And then you're kind of squidged in a bit. So there's no real cup holders in the door either. And like the front of this car, you can't even get a full-size water bottle in these particularly easily. Finally, I should probably point out some of the amenities and also the fact that you can't put your feet underneath the front seats if the driver and the front seat passenger have their seat all the way down, which they probably will because that's going to give them the most legroom. So you have some movement here, but think maybe premium regular economy on a plane as opposed to first class. You do get a USB-A and a USB-C charging port as standard, which is nice, and this particular trim variant comes with heated outboard seats, but this seat is not heated. So if you're going to be on a trip with 5 people, someone's going to have to not get a heated seat in the winter. That's it for today. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to leave your thoughts below or in our free to join Discord chat room. There are links in the video description. And if you really liked today's video, why not leave us a super thanks? It is easy to do, and everything you do send our way goes towards helping us make great content. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribed to this channel and our other channel, Transport Evolved Take 2, and give the bell a gentle little ding to make sure that you are told when our next video goes live. And thanks as always to everybody who makes this channel possible. That includes everyone who supports us on Patreon and YouTube, as well as those of you who just watch the video and share it.
If you're a supporter at the charged up level, you'll see your name right here on our right. And if you just joined, we're sorry if your name isn't showing just yet. We render the list out every week or so, but sometimes our videos are produced a few weeks in advance. Thanks to our self-driving tier supporters, Mike Weeder, Patrick Boyarski, Chris Maxwell, Brian Newton, Michael Goad, Bennett Elder, Andrew Martin, Pedro Muro Pinheiro, Brophy Wolf, Chris and Michael Johnson, Tesla in the Gong, Dan Blair, Peter Dillinger, Gordon C., Stephen O'Donoghue, Kyle Hodgson, Anthony Coates, Regine Fellows, Denny Hyde, Chris Ascenta and Jim Burness. And of course, out of this world support to our Starman supporters, Andrew Glenn, Anonymous Freak, JP Fagerback, Joe Bresney, John Lyons, Rory Litwin, Kevin Burrowbridge, Laura Reynolds, Marcel Ward, Matthew Drobnak, Paul Conway, Reggie Watts, Will Graylan.
Ian.
It's Ian.
And Ian. If you'd like to be part of that amazing list, you can join Patreon at the link below. You can hit the join button to support us on YouTube, or you can show us your support through Bitcoin, Ko-fi, or by buying something from our cool swag store. There are links below. And if you are unable to support us financially, please know that just watching the video, sharing it, and interacting with the channel on YouTube and on other social media platforms really makes a difference to how our videos perform. So thanks for joining us, and as always, keep evolving.